Justice and Peace, Zach Bale, the Chief Program Officer for Housing Connect, formerly known as the Salt Lake County Housing Authority, and Shawn McMillen, the Executive Director of First Step House. So Jean is the co-chair of the coalition itself. Zach co-chairs the Housing Core Function, and Shawn co-chairs the Health and Wellness Core Function. So this morning I thought it'd be helpful if maybe Jean just could provide an overview of the kind of news service pattern that we have, kind of how we got here, where we are at this point in time.
How many of you have actually heard of the Salt Lake Valley Coalition End Homelessness? All right, and how many of you are participating in the Coalition End Homelessness? Yay, John, thank you. So I'm going to give you that opportunity at the end of this to all join us on the Coalition End Homelessness, because it is a group that we are dedicated to ending homelessness in the Salt Lake Valley. And we know, we will never end homelessness, but we can certainly do far more to make sure that it is brief, rare, and non-recurring, which is what the coalition is designed to do. So the coalition came about before the audit, but certainly it is trying to respond to a number of the issues that were raised in the audit, because those issues have been known to us long before that audit was done. This began an initiative with Salt Lake County that called Collective Impact. They tried to bring together all of the stakeholders in the home services system to figure out how do we better serve people. As that process moved along, we had assistance from HUD as well, talking about what the needs were going to be to meet federal requirements for homeless services. And we've had a number of experts come in and help inform the system also, and the audit helped inform this system. And what came of it is this new coalition that is designed to bring all of the service providers together, all interested stakeholders together, and most importantly of all, give a meaningful voice to the clients as well. So that we're looking at the homeless services system as a system rather than each little group doing their part, and not little groups, big groups, but each group doing what they can. We want to bring all those groups together and say, okay, where are we not serving well? Where are we serving well, but there's more we could do? And where do we need the funding to really go across the system to make a difference? So it's not just, hey, my agency needs funds. It is, how is your agency contributing to the system as a whole, and where is the best place to put those funds to meet our priorities, which are making homelessness brief, rare, and non-recurring. And I will keep saying that because that is our mantra, brief, rare, non-recurring. So that's what's happening. Here's a lovely little diagram. You can get this online too. There's a number of websites, but the coalition now finally has our own website, which is endhomelessnessutah.org. We are comprised of 8 core function groups that Mike mentioned. Each of us is a lead of one of those core function groups, and those 8 are trying to bring together what are the core functions of a homeless services system. Obviously housing, also health and wellness. We know that folks who are homeless often have severe health issues, mental health issues, physical health issues, substance abuse issues, employment, education, legal rights, and safety, and not just public safety of the communities around a resource center, say, but the legal rights of those who are being served, which often get trampled in some of these processes. So we want to make sure those are represented. The client focus is another group. I'm going to forget one. Community engagement, just to make sure that community members are involved in this whole process as well, because the communities matter. And crisis response. The goal of this whole coalition too, along with the bigger goal, is that shelter isn't the end goal. What we want to do is move as many people out of shelter as quickly as possible and keep people from going into shelter in the first place. So the coalition has a big mandate. And that's why we want as many people involved in helping us meet that mandate as we can get. So anyone who wants to attend a core function meeting is welcome to. Anyone who wants to attend a steering committee is welcome to. And it's not just sitting in the audience and listening. You really are. We do want input from people who are engaged in the system and have something to say about how people are being served or how communities are being served or whatever pieces of the system that you're most interested in. Please do attend those core function groups. And all of the agendas and meeting dates and times are on that Utah Homelessness website.
Great, thank you. I think that's helpful to kind of get a baseline of where we're at. So Jean mentioned housing is certainly an issue. Senator Kitchen mentioned housing as well. So Zach, could you take a few minutes and talk about kind of housing specifically, what the Housing Connect is doing, as well as the work you're the housing core function is participating in.
Sure. Yes, I'm very thankful to be here and to have all the questions about housing. It really is a key foundation need that we all really benefit from. We know that. And so as a part of the core function group, we really sat and thought some of what's our role. In context of all the community efforts, there's certainly a lot of conversation. There's a lot in the news. There's many groups that are focusing on affordable housing from different angles. There's a state commission from the legislature, a state commissioned task force on looking at affordable housing. There's much funded via the university looking at data. Many of the larger cities have funded efforts. And where we landed is our role is really to look at those in greatest need. So those experiencing homelessness, those with limited means, and really make sure that that voice is heard and represented in both our core function group and in those greater conversations about affordable housing. Where we started is there's really, from we see it, and much of what Senator Kitchen mentioned is so in line with what we're thinking, is there's really three elements to housing, especially for those that are experiencing homelessness. That there's enough physical housing units that exist, that there's a means of subsidy that makes it affordable, deeply affordable for most that we see have the need. And then that there's wraparound services that come with that housing. And for many of us, hopefully we have many supports in our lives that help us, and whether they're in a paid role or they're indebted because we're family, hopefully there's that support, and often that makes what housing work well. Looking at a lot of our PSH success rates, our housing retention across all the programs in the county are greater than 90%. Some are upwards towards 100%. So we show that it's incredibly successful once we have the resources. Where we began was we need to know where we're starting. And it's actually been surprisingly impressive how there's many different views on the data. So what we're currently working on is trying to wrap our head around those three things. How many housing units do we have? How much subsidy do we have? And how much case management tied to those units? From there, our hope is really to match with the need. And we have some good data sets as a community looking at income level, how many individuals are experiencing homelessness, and what housing might be a good match to that. From there, our hope is that it lays out a very clear map of where we begin. One of the kind of daunting tasks that certainly is a part of this topic is there's a big need. We have a lot of folks that need housing and need housing that's affordable. It ranges from in the tens of thousands, and then there's certainly some views that we may have enough physical units. I'm not sure that's necessarily the case. But we hope as we look more into this, we'll hone in on where are places we can make immediate impact. I think one of the things that I've heard of the last round of the legislature, there's probably many other political things that went into it, but part of the role that we need is to really show concrete ways that we can impact through investment that show quick results. And I think when we talk the broad numbers, and actually I wholeheartedly agree with a large community bond that just gives us a major injection of resource into the community. The other ways we look at kind of specific needs of families, specific needs of veterans, specific needs of those over 55 or 62. And when we look at those subgroups, some of what we need, we don't need that much more. We may need a small investment that really helps us. When we look at, let's say, those who have served our country, we have just over 100 individuals, veterans, who are experiencing homelessness. It's a very small number, and I would hope that as a community, we can take care of that and have the means and resources available. So we hope that as we match those, that happens. And then kind of maybe to the bond conversation, we do need more housing. When we look at the levels of affordability, many of the conversations are about, say, 60% AMI. And so as that calculates out, that may be rents for a one bedroom around $650 to $700. If we look at households that are on fixed income, SSI, 30% of their income, which really is an appropriate, healthy amount to pay to rent, is $233. So there's a huge gap between much of what's being built is affordable and what actually is affordable. And so our role will be to really look at the deeply affordable. What brings those down to a level that's sustainable for folks?
Great. Can I just do a quick follow-up? You mentioned PSH. Can you explain, make sure everyone understands that term and kind of what that looks like?
Great. So PSH stands for Permanent Supportive Housing. So permanent in the sense that that's home. Folks move in and they can live there for as long as they choose to live there. And then the supportive housing part, what we know is when case management, other services, most always it's voluntary. So the individuals choose to engage, and staff certainly do an amazing job of making sure all the kind of the menu of help is available. But it comes with those supports. Many of those sites, they look very different. We have permanent supportive housing that's scattered site where individuals choose to rent their own apartment. Services come to the individual to make sure that they have what they need to help maintain housing. Then we have some very dedicated sites that are kind of congregate in setting where our agency, we have, say, Graceberry Manor, Kelly Benson that serve specific individuals and have services on site that are available.
Great, thanks. So we've talked about housing for folks, but Shawn, you kind of deal with the special populations. So can you speak about housing for kind of those special groups, special populations? And I'm particularly interested in a better understanding of kind of recovery housing and how that operates.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Bill and Crossroads Urban for inviting us today. Important subjects. Housing for specialty populations is first what Zach just talked about, permanent supportive housing. That is a housing model that is housing as a healthcare intervention. It wraps behavioral health services team around an individual with some sort of a disability or special need indefinitely. That team is there, is that individual's personal behavioral health team, I would to be more specific, their personal health care team, because there are primary care providers that are often attached to those teams that make sure that the individual's primary health care as well as behavioral health care needs get met. It's an intervention that is usually used with populations that meet criteria for a serious mental illness or a serious and persistent mental illness. So very high need individuals that need a lot of contact on a day in and day out basis. There are levels of intensity of all of that, and even within the PSH model, the intensity will modulate from being very intense and daily or even 4 times a day contact with an individual who might be in psychiatric crisis, who's living in an apartment, to an individual who is seeing a case manager for medication, a care manager for medication monitoring once a month. It can have a range. You asked specifically about recovery housing. So I am the co-chair, along with Laura Murkowski from 4th Street Clinic, of the Health and Wellness Core Function Group of the Coalition. I like to call it the SVEC, for fun. But the Coalition. What we're working on is that range of what are the behavioral health care as well as the primary health care needs of individuals who are literally homeless and getting their health care while living publicly, and what are the health care needs of those individuals who are living in PSH housing, because they are often, if not always, individuals who have had episodes of homelessness, and how do we make sure that all of that healthcare need, both behavioral health and primary health care, are addressed so that individuals can be as healthy as possible wherever their situation is. This, over the years, has gotten me to thinking about housing as a healthcare intervention. And if you think about housing as a healthcare intervention, then you start to think about the needs of specialty populations and particular types of housing that we've developed, so rapid rehousing and transitional housing, recovery housing, congregate housing, all of those. And when we do assessment, at least on the mental health and substance abuse sides, when we do assessment, we can actually get a really good sense for what an individual's needs are as far as housing is concerned. And for some individuals, we might prescribe rapid rehousing, which is a temporary housing subsidy and the individual is going to assume full responsibility for their rent because they are an individual who has the capacity to earn a living wage. But another housing intervention that could be employed or for individuals who are exiting substance use disorder treatment is recovery housing. And that would be indicated for somebody who has had multiple previous treatments, has a high severity substance use disorder. It's not indicated for an individual with a serious mental illness or a serious and persistent mental illness. I'm talking recovery housing here. It's not indicated because recovery housing is a very structured environment. There is a lot of autonomy, but there is very high expectation to pay rent on time, do certain things around the house, attend some sort of recovery support group, attend a house meeting, and generally get along well with your housemates. An individual who might be in significant psychiatric distress is going to struggle with those things. So that, as a housing intervention, wouldn't be the ideal option for them. But that individual who has long history of substance use disorder, has had multiple previous treatment, needs support for an extended period of time, recovery housing would be a good option for them because it provides that social milieu, that support structure. It has those high expectations for abstinence among them. So they must be drug-free while they're living in these environments. And what we know about recovery housing as a model is that an individual who has been appropriately assessed and referred, if they stay a minimum of 6 months, they will still be doing well at 18 months. 75% of them will still be doing well at 18 months. Now, when you think about this world of substance use disorder treatment, we lose most of the people that we treat. They return to use within the first 90 days. When I say most, I'm talking 35-40% is what the data says. Return to use within that first 90 days post-treatment. Now, when I say treatment, I'm talking acute treatment, the residential, the very structured environment. But when you continue when you support those treatment gains that you've achieved with outpatient and case management and recovery housing, you start to see numbers like 75% are still doing well at 18 months. That gets really close to 24 months, which is a sweet spot. If you can get an individual to 24 months of abstinence and employment and stable housing, the likelihood that they will still be doing well at 60 months is in the neighborhood of 85%. So if you think about all of this as healthcare intervention, those are the kinds of things that you want to be doing.
And just to clarify, so then is recovery housing, is it one site or scattered sites? Like, would you have a group in one particular apartment building, or they'd be just kind of in different places with case management?
The recovery housing that we operate is scattered site. So we have a combination of fourplexes and duplexes for a total of 48 beds. And each house has its own community. They do things socially. It is always a congregate care model or a congregate housing model. It's shared housing.
They have that support from each other too. Great. All right. So as we think about resources for the new system, I think we would all agree there are never enough resources, right? And Senator Kitchen referred to that as well. Can each of you identify maybe 2 or 3 places where increased investment could improve the system we're currently reorganizing? So this time we'll start with Zach.
First one's easy. We need a whole bunch more money for housing.
You haven't heard that enough, right?
But I think what was mentioned, the bond, really is the most likely mechanism. So the building housing is expensive, and so the current available options are primarily low-income tax credits, both federal and state, and commonly banks are the ones that purchase those. So it just takes a whole bunch there. Kind of the two others, I don't quite know what this investment would, but we need the economy to work for everyone. So wages, if the earned and livable wage was sufficient to afford much of the housing that was being built, that would be better. So I think something in that realm. And then the third, investment in coordination. I think our system probably is getting a little bit, maybe more complex, or it always has been complex. There's efficiencies to be gained in terms of the kind of back-end structure that makes sure we effectively utilize all the resources. And I think that's unfortunately one of the most common areas. And it makes sense. I think what we've done historically is we put a lot of money on the front end of let's get most out to services, and we still should do that, but there always needs to be kind of the structure. And even digging into this data, I think some of the reason why we don't have as much as we need is we need the time and resource and skill to really go and study and make the best informed decisions we can.
All right, great. Shawn, what are your thoughts on where improved investments can help our system?
The behavioral health services system, and particularly the substance use disorder treatment system, we have operated a parallel system for housing services to all of this, and it's only actually been with Jean and folks like Bale and Glenn who have started to invite folks like me to the table where housing for the homeless is discussed. We've always served those people, but it's only been in the last 3 or 4 years that we've really been invited to the table. Now, I'm one of those annoying folks in that I understand that there are high-need individuals who are literally homeless, who are costing our system and emergency services and criminal justice system involvement extraordinary amounts of money. And so even in my world where we talk about you dedicate the most resource to the individuals who are the most expensive to serve. And for us, that's individuals with high levels of criminal justice system involvement, individuals who are homeless, all of that sort of stuff. But an individual who is literally homeless and resistant, we need to target them. And that's typically the housing first, and Zach got at what the obstacles to that are. But we've got this low-hanging fruit over here. And those are people who are exiting programs like mine. So 54% of the individuals who enter my program are individuals who have had a shelter bed day night in the previous 12 months, at least one, most significantly more. But that's 50% of 737 people. That's a lot. That's a big end. And if we're able to keep them engaged in treatment at the back end, I've got about 40% of those, of that total, that 737, who have housing need. They need housing. This is low-hanging fruit. And many of them are individuals who could probably find housing in the marketplace. Many of them are individuals who would benefit for a period of recovery housing. Many of them are individuals who would benefit from a temporary subsidy like rapid rehousing. But some of them are individuals who desperately need PSH. So I've got that entire range. And so we need to find, I think we could get more efficient by developing our capacity to be more prescriptive about who we're targeting for different types of housing. And I just think there's an incredible opportunity there. to be prescriptive in our utilization. Talking to those people, because we're interacting with them. We've got tons of screening data, we've got tons of assessment data. We know who should go where. But then that gets back to Zach's point that we just ain't got enough. And so we just desperately plug people in wherever there's an available spot. That's not ideal, that's not efficient. I think even though we have a gap, we've still got opportunity and should start to work toward being more prescriptive in the utilization of existing resource.
Great. And Jean, what are your insights or thoughts on where we can make some 2 or 3 improved investments to help improve the system?
Well, I'm good because I think what these two both said is exactly right. I think we all know that housing is going to be a key and different types of housing. So I'm going to take it a little differently and talk about resources we already have that won't cost us more but could really help a lot, such as not raising the sales tax on food. We can very simply not do that. And then we aren't causing problems with people's budgets. We could raise the minimum wage. We know the wages are stagnant in this valley. If people can't afford housing because the housing is going up so quickly, maybe we need to look at the wage side of things and make sure people are making a living wage. And we could do some policy changes in affordable housing. We have these lovely policies that say if a developer puts in 20% affordable units, they get tax breaks. Well, what do those 20% look like? Those aren't units dedicated to affordable housing. Those are units that, if somebody who needs affordable housing applies, we'll give them to them. But if they don't, it's a market rate unit. And we don't know what's happening to those units. We do not have within our inventory, and that's one of the things that the housing group is working on, an understanding of where are these units, who has them, and when those folks move out, what's happening to them. So none of those take more financial resources, they take policy changes. So I think those are my top 3, and then of course we have transportation needs. With our scattered site model, we need free transportation options. And those are things, again, that there are some policy matters that can help with that. There are some financial matters that can help with that. That's not the most critical need, frankly, because the housing is the critical need, but it is certainly an area where resources are needed soon if we're really going to have this scattered site model work the way it's intended to.
Thank you. So, Jean, earlier you mentioned that the community, you're not letting them off the hook, right? There are things they can do. So what I'd like each of you to kind of respond to what people in the community could do to help make homelessness brief, rare, and non-reoccurring.
Thank you. And I apologize, it looks like the website I gave you is not actually working right now. So you can go to homelessutah.org and find the coalition, and you'll find all of those meeting agendas and times and dates. And I think that's step 1. The community needs to be engaged, and not just, what we hear from community right now is those who are near the resource centers are vocal in positive and negative ways, which is understandable. But we need people not just to be worried about what's happening in their neighborhood. We need people who are worried about why are people living on the street outside of Library Square. Those are folks we need to hear from, and not just us. Obviously, our legislators and our federal delegation, frankly, need to hear from as well, because federal policy is going to cause us more trouble. If the current HUD proposals go through, our homeless population is going to go up. So we need advocacy, and everyone, you can go to Crossroads, you can go to the coalition, you can go to any of those agencies within the coalition. We all have advocacy steps, advocacy items that we are more than happy to share with you and have more voices speaking on. If you don't already have that sense already, because I know a lot of you are already engaged in advocacy, that has to continue. Medicaid expansion, we know, is going to face changes in this legislative session coming up. Get involved in that. But first and foremost, I would encourage all of you to attend a core function group or more than one core function group. Learn the data, because that is what the core function groups are focused on right now. We want these to be data-informed decisions. So get more information, and then get involved through those core function groups, because what we really want to see happen too with this coalition is we're going to go up to the legislature as a coalition and say this is what's happening, not just in 1 or 2 agencies or areas, but across the Salt Lake Valley, and these are the needs, and this is where the priorities are, and these are the policy changes we need. And the more voices, as you know, the more voices we have, the stronger we are. So please get involved in those groups.
Zach, what are your thoughts on ways the community can get engaged to make homelessness brief, rare, and non-reoccurring.
One that so many of us already do is help those around you. I think one thing I think a lot about is how many individuals don't need as much help because of just the natural support structures that are in place. So I think that's one. And that's often our natural kind of buffer as things get difficult in our lives. Very directly, I would echo what Jean said, is join in the conversation. I think one, bring skill. So I'm looking out, I know that everyone has kind of a particular knack and ability, and much of those we need. We need individuals that are good with data, good with numbers. One of the things we've bumped into is many of us serving in the role on the coalition have a whole bunch other that we're tending to, and we need additional time and knowledge to assist, to make sure we do all of this quickly. I think also bringing, similar to what Senator Kitchen did, is as much as we're going to look at the broad, we also need the stories. We need to hear the particulars, because there isn't a one-size-fits-all. And often those are what lead us to the best innovations, where, you know, as a system, we don't quite understand something until someone explains how their day was. We think about it when, if, let's say, the process to go through our website is really clunky and someone has difficulty with transportation and eventually makes it into our office and we don't really answer their question very well, and they're just trying to get the help they need. And so much of that helps us get better. Wholehearted support of Medicaid, and especially talk around the additional supports of Medicaid around the housing supports. So I think often the community will go to, well, this is medical support. Shawn mentioned that's much broader than just going to a clinic and receiving treatment for whatever that may be. It really is those long-term supports that help health be great. And then maybe a third is trauma. I don't know if we talk about trauma enough, and that's, again, different for every different person, but I think so much of the challenge of what we have in our community is we have a lot of trauma and folks that go through incredibly difficult things that come with you into the future. And I think as a community, and especially those that have the ability to make decisions, we need that to be understood, and that is something that we have to bake into our system. We have to understand that that is a part of the experience, and that we need the supports to help people with that element too. One quick example, we've had many individuals that have lived on the street for a long time. They move into an apartment, they stay for a couple days, maybe they sleep on the floor, maybe they go back out and stay on the street for a little bit, and they'll often talk about that transition. And you know, there's one gentleman that told me, well, most of my day was really, you know, I had to travel across town and go find what I needed at different locations, and now that I'm at home and I have a telephone right here, there was almost kind of this emptiness of, what do I do now? What do I do with my time? And to me, that's the other element we have to address, is it's not, again, just a unit, but also even someone that can sit with them and talk and help them through that transition, because that part is probably as, if not more hard than you got your key and you're excited, and then what about day two? So.
Great, thanks. And Shawn, again, ways the community can be engaged in helping make homelessness brief, rare, and non-reoccurring.
This last point that Zach made about social capital, you know, it's so incredibly important. So many of the folks that we serve, so many of the folks that I encounter have had long periods of homelessness, they've got a social network, but when they become a housed person, that's incredibly disruptive to that social network. And they've got to rebuild some things, and helping folks build that, become part of that individual's social capital in whatever way that you can is important. Medicaid is a game changer, but Medicaid doesn't do everything. No, it don't do it. There are all kinds of housing supports that we provide now by cobbling together other resources, and we'll have to continue to cobble together, because Medicaid doesn't provide, doesn't have within the benefits package interventions that are really well designed to allow us to take services to individuals who are literally homeless or formerly homeless and now in these housing settings. I'll give a specific example. Another way, and because you're all here and Crossroads does so much advocacy work, I assume that a lot of you are vociferous in the community. So in the last Department of Workforce Services Housing and Community Development grant round, we, First Step House, applied for about $470,000 in grants for services case management services to wrap around individuals who are exiting shelter. So this is to transition individuals out of the HRCs, the Homeless Resource Centers. We were funded at $107,000. Based on that, what's that? And we came up with our number for, we were applying for a number of different things, based on the numbers of individuals that are anticipated to be served and the number of individuals we think we could serve who are identified as having a substance use disorder or mental health condition. So we really felt that what we needed to be able to deliver was about $470,000 in case management services to transition folks out of shelter and into the community. We got funded at 107. Now, we've built these shelters, these homeless resource centers, sorry, friends. These homeless resource centers, and we didn't support the back door. We gotta do something about that. That is a big deal. That is a really big deal. Otherwise, all we've done is just dispersed shelter bed days. And that's where people will live until we can incrementally get them engaged in services, unless we bring the supportive services up to scale. And the third thing was that came to mind for me, and this is, so the Trump tax plan has hurt nonprofit organizations in a big way. Because now that threshold that I have to hit for my donation to be tax deductible is way higher. In fact, I don't earn that much to give above the threshold. And we've seen donation decrease. Now, the data is that, well, people don't give because of the tax benefit. People give because they care about the mission. Well, in this most recent year, actually, nonprofit organizations saw contributions decrease, contributions from individuals decrease. And the only thing that it correlates to, at least at this point, because we're still early, is that tax benefit is now gone. So it's not conclusive, but that is a big deal. So tell your friends, hey, it's important that we still give to nonprofit organizations. And here's why. That 407 that we asked for, we cobbled together the dollars from individuals and corporations who are doing philanthropic giving to do what we are able to do in that space, because Medicaid doesn't pay for it. HCD doesn't pay for it. Others do.
Great, thank you. So you all have got your marching orders now, right? You know what to do. So just to wrap things up this morning, so much of our conversation is focused on adults within the system. Working in a school, I would just like to get your thoughts on how this new system will help support students, as well as those youth living on the streets, experiencing homelessness, and how the system will help benefit them and their families. So just kind of brief, and then we'll kind of wrap it up. So we'll start with Shawn.
That's out of my scope. We serve, some transition age youth, that 19 to 25. But their issues look just like the issues of older individuals, and we help them access the same services that anybody else is accessing.
Zach.
This it's a tough part of the topic. So I think, again, with Senator Kitchen's story, that tells a lot about the experience of children. And linking that with trauma, it's not the way we want children and youth to begin life. And while there can be some incredible kind of resilience that gets built out of that, I don't think that should be the necessary path for that to be learned. As you know, Mike, better than really anyone, the system needs to work quick and efficiently, and the rare, brief, and non-reoccurring probably means the most for our youngest, because the quicker that occurs and households land back at stable housing, the better. They anchor at a school and make those strong connections. And prior to my current role, working with a lot of the youth on the street, many of those that didn't end up there, school was kind of the second safety net after parents. And so we need that connection to be strong and long term, where our leaders in our schools know their youth and can tell what's going on today. And when we went out to many of the high schools, it was amazing to hear how often, and it would take a bit for it to be discovered, but a youth may have been living near the school or maybe in the school, or the gym teacher was doing the laundry for the youth and they were showering at school, and eventually this comes out and it's asked, how long has this been going on? And it's not a day or two, it's quite a while. The doubled up is another incredibly large number that we really actually don't know, probably even the full scope of how much that is. Specific to youth, so let's say 16 to young 20s in that transition age, we've got a whole bunch more to do. When we look at our housing retention, those statistics that I mentioned that are really great are great, but not as much for the youth population. It drops pretty quickly about how their first couple goes at housing. And I think often that's just the lessons in life. If we think back on many of our transitions, whether one has the parents' basement to return home to, roommates can be difficult, you learn stuff through that, but when we make that official, there's a lease and one could get evicted, that has long-term consequences, and so there's going to need to be some specific focus there to make sure that as a system we don't harm individuals that are making that leap. But above all trauma, we got to think about how we buffer kids from